Earlier this week, we marked 100 days, and now it's many more than that, of hostages that were being held in captivity in Gaza. There have, of course, been more protests, and it seems as if the war is simply raging on in a way that, frankly, and I'm sure for many of you, makes me saddened to realize how much life is lost, how much psychological and emotional, physical terror have been experienced by so many people, and none of it's right, and none of it should be happening. When I think about what happened in Israel, of course, I have to think back not just from October 6th, which was, of course, the day before the great atrocity, but what was going on even before. And I recently took the time to watch most of a frontline retrospective of what was happening with Benjamin Netanyahu, which kind of reminded me of why the peace process in many regards broke down. And of course, also equally reminded me that Israel had started to slowly move toward the right in some of the things that it's done, which of course has made me saddened. What surprised me was, as somebody who pays so much attention to Israel, somebody who has family there and used to travel all the time there, I think it was kind of happening, and I slowly but surely was tuning myself out to parts of it. The truth is, I didn't necessarily even want to see what was going on. When I think about why the peace process failed, I have to, of course, take into account the suicide bombings in the Intifada Part 2 that happened following Rabin's assassination. I have to think about what Ariel Sharon said and did when we decided to pull out, or Israel, I shouldn't say we, because I certainly wasn't asked. Nobody thought to ask my opinion. So it's such an important opinion. It's not. I'm a small rabbi. But really what was happening when Ariel Sharon decided to pull out of Gaza and then recognized that Bibi Netanyahu has at times gone above and beyond, all the time taking many opportunities to shake Yasser Arafat's hand when Arafat was alive, and not necessarily always following up with positive action to match that sign that he did by shaking his hand. He wasn't stated outright, even from then, supportive of the idea of a Palestinian state. And what does that mean for all of us now? Well, unfortunately, we're living in a time period where some of those policies, as they say, we're having to eat the cake with that too, and the icing and everything else that went in, now that the cake's already been baked. Extremists on the margins of Israel have found themselves, frankly, into the cabinet, because Netanyahu wanted to have a coalition government. And of course, it's so easy to play Monday morning quarterback, but how frequently have we actually paid attention to every little thing that was going on? When Hamas took control, the Israeli government decided to blockade, leaving Gazans in misery and poverty. They weren't alone in that decision, though. They did it in concert with their neighbor to the south, Egypt, with the full knowledge of the Arab world looking on. Don't think for a second we do anything in a vacuum. Certainly, I know that I'm in a little bit of a spotlight, and what I do, other people see and notice. What Israel did, other people saw and noticed, and nobody did anything, and everybody apathetically sat quietly by. When Itamar Ben-Gvir and Smotrich came to power and they wanted to change the government, we saw Israelis marching in the street for 11 months, I think, or 7 months. It was a long time. I forgot to write down the exact month here, and of course my memory, I'm not remembering. They were uncomfortable with where their country had gone, and many of us, and especially in the liberal part of the Jewish world found ourselves to be equally uncomfortable. And I ask, have we always kept and have they kept the core narrative of what I believe who we are as a Jew at the heart of the decisions? And when I see Israeli fundamentalists, I think the answer most likely is no. Or their reading of it is very different from mine. The heart of every Jewish ritual, the story that we repeat multiple times, is the Exodus from Egypt, where we remember that we were once slaves and strangers in the land of Egypt. We fail to remember that because we were strangers in Egypt, we have to turn around and treat others with kindness, love, and compassion. We have to protect the stranger. In this week alone, we read a very, I think, wonderful, beautiful sentiment. There shall be one law for the citizen and for the stranger who dwells among you. One law, one set that everybody should be treated by with equality. And yet, all of us are known to see, even in this country, different standards of justice which continue to persist. Jeremiah, and I'm reading a quote from something I wrote, which is always very exciting. Jeremiah reminds us that we can, again, strengthen from every challenging moment of our history and realize that we have an obligation to speak up, use our voice to better the world around us, and ensure that everyone's voice is heard. He inspired me to write that when I read through his book many times again and again. And it is in fact Jeremiah that we read this week in relation to this parsha, to remind us of the value of justice for all. It's a hard thing to do, to treat everybody with equality, to realize that slowly but surely we've moved ourselves further to the right, to recognize that some of the things that have happened are not in concert or in line with our Jewish ideals. Of course, when we look at the death and the tragedy in Gaza, we say that shouldn't happen. None of it's right. Nobody should be dying this way. When we see the suffering of Israelis who had to, earlier this week, watch a horrific Hamas psychological game of terror by looking at 3 different individuals as they ask, what happened to these 3? And the next day, Noah, who was a young woman who was held hostage, shared that the 2 men who were with her were murdered. That's what happened to those 3. And it was done to inflict more terror. None of that's right either. As there's been more death and destruction where Gazans don't have a place, or Palestinians in Gaza don't have a place to go back to call their home, it doesn't get us closer to peace. Again, none of it's right. And while Israel still struggles with what's going to happen when this war ends, I can only hope that we all collectively encourage ourselves and our brothers and sisters in Israel to do what is right. To remember that wonderful verse in Exodus, there shall be one law for the citizen and the stranger who dwells among you. To remember that we were strangers in the land of Egypt. To remember to treat others with loving kindness. To try to act morally and ethically in an upright fashion, even when others around us may not be. The hardest thing to do. Shabbat Shalom.